Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is. Namaste. Welcome to episode, I think it's 148 of Left Side of the Aisle. I'm your host. My name's Larry Erickson. And for the next half hour or so, I'm going to be ranting away at you about something that I think is worthy of your attention. As always, any reactions to the show can be sent to me directly. The address is whoviating, whoviating at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. You can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there. If you do email me, please be sure to include something in the subject line, like, Left Side of the Aisle, cable show, something, so that's clearly not spam. And be a little patient. I'm a little slow about answering email, but I do answer it. You will get an answer. All right, this is going to be a little bit different this week. I have just one topic for the entire show. It's an expansion on something I've talked about the last couple of weeks, or sort of a backup for it. Last week, I'd have to actually start with not really a correction, a clarification is a better term, of something I said last week. Last week I was talking about the idea that being rich is a sickness, that being rich is sick. That's not really quite right. Being rich is an unhealthy condition that can lead to sicknesses, but it's not itself a sickness. And that way, it's like obesity. Okay, obesity is not itself a sickness. You can be fat and healthy your entire life, but it does put you at much greater risk of other things like, cholesterol issues or heart trouble or diabetes or things like that. So that it's an unhealthy condition, but it's not itself a sickness. In the same way, being rich is an unhealthy condition. Now, it's possible to be rich your entire life and still be a decent human being. That is possible. So it's not that being rich is a sickness, it's that it's an unhealthy condition that leads to sicknesses. And the thing is, in this case, the sicknesses do not so much afflict that person as they do the society around them. Simply put, when I say that being rich is an unhealthy condition, being rich puts you at greater risk of being a self-absorbed, selfish, conceited, narcissistic sociopath, utterly convinced of your own inherent superiority, lacking a social conscience, and callously indifferent to the needs and concerns of others. At least those others who are not of your elevated social class, and maybe you don't care about them either. The thing is, too, the richer you are, the greater the risk there is. And no, that is not hyperbole. There is a mass of psychological and sociological data to support that contention. And if you don't believe me, get comfortable. You're about to get a lesson. Here's some data. Consider, for one example, a study that was published 2 years ago in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This is a peer-reviewed journal. It was done by Paul Piff of UC Berkeley and 4 colleagues from the University of Toronto. They conducted a series of 7 studies that showed, in the words of the title of their paper, higher social class predicts increased unethical behavior. The studies found that, as compared to lower class individuals, upper class individuals were more likely to break the law while driving, more likely to exhibit unethical decision making, more likely to take valued goods from others, more likely to lie in a negotiation, more likely to cheat in order to increase their chances of winning a prize, more likely to endorse unethical behavior at work, and more likely to have a favorable view of greed. The fact is, being rich undermines your morality. In a follow-up study published this last August of 2013, in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, Piff and some other colleagues conducted 5 experiments which demonstrated, quoting again, higher social class is associated with increased entitlement and narcissism. These experiments involved several hundred undergraduates and 100 adults that were recruited from online communities. They used multiple methods for measuring narcissism, entitlement, and social class in multiple populations. This is actually the great strength of this study, in that it asked the same question multiple different ways, okay? The thing is, the results of all these different ways of asking were consistent. Essentially, right down to the bottom line, the richer you are, the more likely you are to be a self-important twit. For example, when asked to visually depict themselves as circles, with larger circles indicating greater importance, richer people pick larger circles for themselves and smaller circles for other people. They also looked in the mirror more frequently and spent more time looking when they did. Another test that was done measured how the participants scored on a standard scale of psychological entitlement, the measure of how entitled you think you are to what you have. They found that those of a higher social class, and by the way, social class was based on a combination of income, education, and the social prestige of the kind of job you did. Those of a higher social class were more likely to feel that they just are more deserving than others, while people further down the social ladder were more likely to say, I don't necessarily deserve any special treatment. Now, significantly, the researchers in one of these experiments, they asked some college students in the experiments to report on the education and income level of their parents. Now, note then, the reason this is important is note that these people were undergraduates. They have not yet made a success of themselves in the world. They're undergraduates. Despite that, those with more highly educated and wealthier parents still came out as higher in their narcissism, higher in their self-reported feelings of entitlement and importance. Now, this is important. The reason this is important is because it's often argued that, well, yes, there's an association between rich people and being narcissist, but that's because narcissistic people more self-involved, are more likely to have the drive to become successful and so become rich. Unfortunately, these results indicate it's quite the opposite. The narcissism comes first. That is, that the wealth comes first. It's the wealth that makes you narcissistic, not the other way around. And the fact is that it means that rich people justify what they have by basically convincing themselves that they just deserve it more. They just are more deserving of it. Which means being rich not only undermines your morals, it makes you self-absorbed and selfish. That, by the way, is in a sort of a sidebar here, is reflected in the fact that statistics about charitable giving show that the poorest, measured as a portion of your income, the poorest among us give more than the richest do. The richest give about 1.3% of their income to charitable things. The poor give about 3.2%. It's nearly 2.5 times more. And in fact, related to that same narcissism, the rich tend to give to things either that they use themselves, like a local symphony orchestra, a local theater troupe or something, or things that were more likely to have their name on a plaque somewhere, like at a museum or a university, whereas poor people tended to donate to things that actually helped other people. Now, that narcissism that Piff uncovered in this relates to another study which was also published this past August of 2013. This was done by Michael Krauss of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and Dasher Keltner of UCal Berkeley. It appeared in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Krauss and Keltner set out to examine social class essentialism. Now, to understand this, you have to know what essentialism is. It's the belief that surface differences between two groups of people or things or whatever can be explained by differences in their fundamental natures, their fundamental identities. The example that's often used is that, like dogs are dogs that have a certain dogness about them, and cats are cats that have a certain catness about them, and dogs and cats are not the same thing. They are separate, and they always will be. It's a type of categorization. Now, the thing is, categorization itself is normal and natural. In fact, it's really necessary. If we could not establish mental categories for things, we would be hard put to establish relationships among various things. So it's, an entirely natural thing to do. Thing is, essentialism sees such categories as natural. That is, they don't just exist in our heads. They're not just mental constructs that we come up with in order to organize and explain the world around us. These categories actually exist in the world outside. And what's more, these categories are both discrete and stable. Things that appear different on the surface are different because they differ in their fundamental nature. Put simply, essentialism is categorization taken to the extreme. Which means actually that essentialism is regarded as the cause of bigotry, prejudice, stereotyping, in that it defines surface differences as fundamental differences. Now, the thing is, people can hold essentialist beliefs on more or less biological things like race and gender and sexual preference and so on, or they can hold, or I should say, and they can hold essentialist beliefs about things that are more social, such as your nationality, your religion, your political beliefs, and so on. In fact, I've commented more than once that the essential bottom line requirement to justifying a war is to define the target as other, as not us, as in some fundamental, discrete way different from us. Well, Krauss and Keltner wanted to examine social class. They wanted to see if people could regard social class essentially the same way they can regard other things. That is, did people find social class to be inherent and fixed? Did they view outward signs of different social classes as reflecting fundamental differences among the people occupying those different social classes? Even more simply put, more bluntly put, the question was, do genes determine what your social class will be? Well, they developed a scale for measuring essentialistic beliefs about class. People were asked about such statements like, for one example, I think if everyone wore the same clothing, you could still tell what social class someone was in. Participants in these experiments, in these studies, also gave a subjective rating to their own social class, their own rank within their community. Again, class being based on education, income, and social status, or the occupational status, the prestige of your job. What they found was, even after controlling for the political orientation of their subjects, plus objective measures of those people's actual income and education levels, the researchers still found that higher social class was associated with greater class essentialism. In other words, and overall, the higher social class you were in, the higher social class you perceived yourself as being in, the more you thought it was because you just deserved to be there. You were supposed to be of a higher status. By your very nature, you were supposed to be of a higher status, to be elevated above the people beneath you. Which means that being rich not only undermines your morals, it not only makes you self-absorbed, it makes you arrogantly condescending. Now, Krauss and Keltner looked deeper into the connection between social class and essentialist beliefs by testing participants' belief in the idea of a just world. Now, just world theory was developed in the 1960s, and it's based on the idea that people they're driven, they're motivated to regard the world as a just and fair place, because the alternative of bad things happening to good people for absolutely no reason at all, no fault of their own, it was just too distressing. So just world theory is actually regarded as the psychological basis for things like blaming the victim. She should have known better than to dress that way, or something like that, with the idea then that justifies what happened to them. Well, in the test, participants were asked to react to statements such as, I feel that people get what they're entitled to have. Krauss and Keltner found that the higher people perceived their own social class to be, the more strongly they endorsed just world beliefs. In other words, if you feel you're doing well, you'll convince yourself that the success comes to people who deserve to be successful, which means then that those of lower status must not deserve to be successful, and the poor are poor because they're supposed to be poor, because by their very nature they do not deserve to have more. Put more bluntly, the upper classes think that the lower classes are not really unfortunate, they're genetically inferior. And the higher your class, the more likely you are to believe that. Being rich undermines your morals and makes you a self-absorbed, arrogant, condescending bigot. No different than those who believe that blacks are genetically inferior to whites. This, by the way, is where this work connects back to Piff's work. Remember, Piff's work showed that it's not that narcissistic people become rich, but that being rich makes you a narcissist. And that it makes you believe that you have more simply because you're supposed to have more. You deserve to have more, that you're simply better than the people who have less than you do, and they have less because they deserve to have less. Krauss and Keltner approached basically that same question from a very different direction and came to the same conclusion. Now, in summing up previous research done by others, Piff said that upper-class individuals also, quoting him, showed reduced sensitivity to others' suffering as compared to working and middle-class people. Now, Piff suggested this is because lower-class and middle-class and working-class people are more likely to spend time taking care of others and interacting with others in a social network, while upper-class people try to differentiate themselves from others. But there's an at least equally plausible, and I actually think more plausible, explanation for this lack of empathy on the part of the rich. At least in our capitalistic society, wealth means power. It was Lord Acton who said in its popular form, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Well, over the years, psychologists have performed literally hundreds of experiments testing the concepts of power and its exercise, and overwhelmingly they have come to the conclusion that Lord Acton had it right. Power corrupts, and in our society, wealth means power. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about this notion about power. Hi, and we're back. Now, again, we're talking about power and that issue of power. Repeated psychological studies have shown that one of the main problems with authority, with power, is that it makes us less sympathetic to the concerns and welfare of others. People in positions of power are more likely to rely on stereotypes and generalizations when they're judging other people, and they are less likely to make eye contact when they're talking to somebody of a lesser position. In other words, that is, the very experience of having power removes us from connection to others. Put another way, power undermines empathy. It promotes acting on your own desires without considering the effects of your actions on others. It involves a heightened sensitivity to your own interests and desires, and a reduced sensitivity to the interests, desires, and needs of others. Power corrupts. And in our capitalistic society, wealth means power. As an example of this, I said there's a lot of studies, so here's one example. There was a series of experiments done about 4 years ago by Joris Lammers of Tilburg University in the Netherlands and Adam Galinsky of Northwestern. And without getting too bogged down in procedural details, what they did is they primed, is the term, they primed certain people to feel more powerful than others in the same experiment, and then considered their responses to various tests and hypothetical situations. What they found, in sum, is that high-power people judge others more harshly, but themselves more leniently in the same situations. What was objectionable to them when done by others was not so bad when it was done by them. The attitude seemed to be, it's okay for me, but not for you. Low-power people tended to judge themselves and others just pretty much basically the same way. Lammers and Galinsky argue that people with power think it's justified for them to break rules, not only because their power lets them get away with it, but also because they feel at some level that they are entitled to take what they want, because they are entitled to it in a way that lesser people are not, because power corrupts, and wealth means power. More recently, research published last year in the Academy of Management Journal found that giving someone a sense of power instills a black and white sense of right and wrong, mostly wrong. Scott Wiltermuth of the University of South Carolina Marshall School of Business and Francis Flynn of the Stanford Graduate School of Business set up 4 experiments in which they made participants feel powerful, giving them the ability to control resources and administer rewards or punishments. Well, when presented with various hypotheticals of transgressions of various sorts, these participants, the powerful people, were found more likely to say, yes, that's immoral, or no, that's not immoral, whereas less powerful people were more likely to say, it depends. That moral clarity, if you will, led these powerful participants to propose harsher punishments for the same infractions. At the same time, interestingly, and I think revealingly, this same moral clarity did not move those powerful people to propose greater rewards for good behavior. It was all about punishing the lessers, because power corrupts, and wealth means power. Krauss and Keltner, in fact, also addressed this same thing. Their experiments showed a connection between that social essentialist belief that our work ethic, our intelligence, and ultimately our socioeconomic status are part of our genetic inheritance. It's all based in our genes. They found a connection between that and a preference for harsh punishments for infractions over what are called restorative punishments, like community service, for one example. What all this means: power denies empathy, power denies understanding, power denies the needs of others, power corrupts, and wealth means power. Being rich undermines your morals. It makes you a self-absorbed, arrogant, condescending bigot whose ethics and empathy have been corrupted by power, leaving you a vapid, amoral, sociopathic husk with the sense of entitlement surpassing that of a spoiled 6-year-old brat, and often with an attitude to match. And these are the people in charge of our society. These are the people who have the most power, the most economic power, and the most political influence in our society. These are the people the media listen to, give a respectful hearing to, no matter outlandish or idiotic their ramblings. And yes, I am looking at you, Tom Perkins, and the rest of your billionaire buddies. They give a respectful hearing to these people because they're powerful, and because they very often are the same ones who actually own the media. They're also the people that the government listens to. And yes, by the way, that also is backed up by research. For just one example I'll cite, a study done by Thomas Hayes of Trinity University, published in Political Science Quarterly, showed that United States senators, members of the Senate, respond almost exclusively to the interest of their wealthiest constituents. What he did was he compared a massive database of public opinion surveys with senators' voting records for a period between 2001 and 2010. And what he found that was from 2007 to 2010, after, the great crash, senators were somewhat responsive to the interests of the middle class, but still mostly responsive to the interests of the wealthiest of their constituents. And in fact, during the first 6 years, the interests of the middle class didn't figure at all. And across the entire 10-year span, the interests of the poor just never came up. It's important to note, by the way, that this neglect of the poor was bipartisan, that Democrats in the Senate were no more responsive to the needs of the poor than the Republicans were. So to sum up, the most powerful people in our society, the people the media listens to, the people the government listens to, the people who dominate our economy, the people who dominate our political process, are the same people that a mass of psychological and social research says are the most likely among us to be vapid, amoral, self-absorbed, arrogant, condescending, bigoted sociopaths. And we wonder why we're screwed. It's not going to change. It's not going to reverse on its own. MIT economist Darren Acemoglu, who co-authored the book Why Nations Fail, says that, quoting him, "This is a general pattern throughout history. When economic equality increases, the people who become economically more powerful will often attempt to use that power in order to gain even more political power, and once they're able to monopolize political power, they start using that to change the rules in their own favor." It's not going to reverse on its own. It's self-reinforcing, self-replicating. Wealth leads to power, which leads to more wealth, which leads to more power, which leads to, and the cycle goes on. Fewer and fewer people among us getting more and more of the benefits. That's why the rich are, in terms of wealth, running away from the rest of us. That's why they get more and more of the benefits of the society and economy, while the real income, the real purchasing power of the average worker is going effectively nowhere, and in fact is below where it was 35 years ago. It's not going to change. It's only going to get worse. The only question is how fast it will get worse unless we make it change. Frederick Douglass said it. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Change is going to require struggle. It's going to require a genuine social revolution. It's going to require disruption. It's going to require people in the streets. It's going to require a lot more than Twitter feeds and Facebook posts, and it's going to require a heck of a lot more than vote for Democrats. It's going to require a combination of the intensity and determination of the labor movement of the 1930s, the fearlessness of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the passion of the anti-war and counterculture movements of the 60s and early 70s, and the creativity of the Occupy movement of this century. Quoting Douglass again, "It's not the light we need, it's the fire. It's not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake." We are, I fear, approaching a time when we're down to the stark choice of confront or capitulate. Now, none of those movements I mentioned could by any rational argument be called violent, but each in their own way, in their impact, they brought the fire, they brought the thunder, they brought the whirlwind, and we need that sort of storm again. Back in 1995, George Will, who was at passes for an intellectual among the right wing, where there's a considerable overlap with the rich, said in a syndicated column that, quoting him, "Back to 1900 is a serviceable summation of the conservative goal. It's damn well about time we face the fact that he was not exaggerating. We need the earthquake." We'll see you back next week. In the meantime, you have the best week you possibly can. And peace.